Hey everybody, it's Lauren Morn, the Evolving Activist, and I have a treat for you today. This is my friend Rita Morgan, who has been an incredible activist and frankly an inspiration to me for many, many years. And Rita, you went vegan 20 years ago.
Almost 20 years.
20 years, and vegetarian before that, and is also very active on a lot of different social justice fronts. So Rita, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Okay. Well, we can go back 30 years, I guess, when I first read
She started in the womb.
Seriously, I think on some level I did. I think on some level we all did in this movement. But I remember the first time I read about global climate change.
Right.
And the effects of, animal agriculture on the climate. And it just made sense to me.
Right.
The facts spoke for themselves, and I went vegetarian, so for the environment. And then 10 years later, I went vegan for the animals.
Nice.
And that is when I started volunteering at Pasado's Safe Haven.
Wow. Everybody, that's for those of you who don't live here in the Pacific Northwest in the U.S., Pasado's Safe Haven is a beautiful sanctuary up in Monroe, Washington, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I remember meeting Bessie, who was a spent dairy cow, a spent milker, they call them. That's when they're no longer productive. They no longer give it the amounts of milk to earn their keep at the farm. So she was sent to an auction, and she was purchased at the auction by Pasados and friends of mine who worked there. And when I met her, she was a zombie. She was the Walking Dead, and she was only about 4 years old. But we thought that we would bring her back to Pasados and just give her a good week or 2 weeks, whatever she had left.
Right.
And when I saw her transformation in the company of people who loved her and wanted to save her, but was comfortable releasing her too, because she was just, there was nothing left to her.
Yeah.
She gave up many babies, and she gave up everything she had. We wanted to give her that gift too, but she fought back, and she realized where she was, and I've never seen a transformation like that. And that was when the penny dropped that there is just no way I could any longer contribute to the suffering of a beautiful being, especially the females in animal agriculture. Is excruciatingly cruel what we do to them, because we interfere with their most primal connection to this planet, to this plane, which is their babies.
Right.
And that's for every female. And certainly it's not any better for males, but there's something exquisitely cruel about what we do to females that give us their babies and their reproductive byproducts. And so it was and I've always been a feminist.
And that's the big thing. I mean, for me as a feminist as well, just the fact of like how pretty much everything that we do to animals requires us to exploit what is inherently female about another being.
Right.
And I can't personally, I'm pretty sure you're the same as me, but I can't personally stand up and say it's not okay to exploit women. It's not okay to demand or to impose your beliefs on another woman's body, and to not respect her body autonomy, and have that only be okay for human women.
Correct.
For me, that's a real disconnect.
Yeah.
And as a woman, I think of the fact that if we're going to try and dismantle the patriarchy,
correct,
right, we have to look at how that patriarchy is held up by all sorts of other systems, including and most importantly, animal agriculture and just generally the use and exploitation of animals.
Correct.
It relies on us exploiting the female reproductive system.
Yes, yeah, and that was a revelation, to me, and it was one of those things where when it did happen, it was such a shift. And the whole aspect behind disruption,
right,
is that you cannot take that one issue. You have to see that same issue as it's the reality of that issue across all of the systems that what we think are normal or conventional, or it gives you that one breakthrough. Not only opens your eyes, it opens your soul, it opens your heart, and then all of a sudden the world looks so different. And then there's the other aspect where all that information comes rushing in, and it's overwhelming. And now you're like, oh my God, I'm supporting, and people are supporting cruelty and exploitation on all these levels, and but that is the reality of when you disrupt a system. It's not just one system, it goes so deep.
Exactly. And that's a really important thing. I think we're starting to see these days more and more intersectional awareness across the social justice movements. But Rita, you've been an activist for decades now. What do you think? I mean, that takes a lot of resilience, and it takes a lot of stamina, right? What would you attribute to you being able to just keep going through those darkest moments?
Yeah. Well, I think understanding the history of social movement is really important, because we can look back, not even that long ago, decades, 50 years, 100 years, whatever, and we can see the dismantlement of the systems that kept oppression in place. And it's never a linear approach. It's never a linear action. It really has ripples. And I think it's important to understand sort of the underlying rationale for a social movement, and you have to pace yourself. You can't allow...
Pace yourself, people. Pace yourself.
Yeah, you can't take it all on. Nobody can take it all on. But that's the beauty behind sort of finding a tribe of people that understand what you're going through, your transformation, and they can echo that, and you can what we did here today, which was talk about all the things that mean so much to us, and the good and the bad, and how far we've come and how far we've yet to go. So the big thing for me was finding my tribe. I moved out here in 1999. I went vegan in 2000, and I found people that are in my life still today that gave me a purpose beyond any measure, and animals who came into my life who gave me so much hope, and talk about resiliency. Animals are incredibly resilient beings, and they are...
Just take a look at Gift. I mean, she's resilient.
You can see what's going on back here, but they're so grounding.
We have two horses here, both of whom are offering Rita's sister Caroline such gorgeous space and love in their own ways. See how Gifty's a little further away and Fella's right up with Caroline? That's exactly what he does, because that's, the two individuals are, they're different, right? He's much more in your face and she's a little more set back, but they're both beautifully offering. I mean, you should see their faces. They are in communion right now. So,
and that again sort of is a role model for us, is that not everybody can take on all the different roles around activism. There's so many. And when I became a vegan almost 20 years ago, it was considered pretty radical. It was considered pretty extreme. And I mean, I was, people thought I was part of a cult. Veganism
she was
was
a dirty hippie. That's what she was.
Yeah, and I was working in corporate America, still work in corporate America, but I never allowed the noise to outstrip the truth.
Say that again.
Yeah.
Say that again.
I never allowed the background noise, to outstrip the truth. I always kept my eye on what I knew was right in my heart. Like I said, when I went through a transformation, that awareness, it was not superficial. It was really deep, and it built on something that I had already known. Right? It's not like I had to take everything that I've ever learned and throw it out the window. It was actually a natural progression. And to me, that's what resonated with me. No, this is something that, a truth that I already knew. I'm just taking it to the next level because I can see the hypocrisy that I have been living. And it's not a scary thing. It was a very liberating thing for me.
I felt that the same too. It was just like this, all of a sudden, an alignment, right? And just this relief almost of leaning into your truth.
Correct. Leaning in, And so I had to deal with, just like everybody who kind of makes a decision like that and starts, you become a little bit of an outlier. Fortunately, I was totally comfortable with being an outlier.
Get comfortable with it.
Get comfortable, embrace it, because you can never go wrong when you embrace the truth like that. And it's not easy, but it's right. It was right for me, and it was right for a lot of people that were going through it at the same time. So surrounding yourself with people who who understand it and can connect with you on it is just huge. And again, like I said, the animals, wow, I cannot even explain how powerful it is to have that that relationship with an animal that knows that you're here for a very specific reason. And you have to be patient, and that's a hard thing to do when you see.
Oh, huge! That is.
Yeah,
huge.
It's a massive problem, and it's overwhelming, but there's just no way for you to take on that mantle. That's just not possible. We're all human after all, and you have to have compassion for people who don't see the truth either, because it's a result of a lot of marketing and a lot of indoctrination, and so you have to realize that as well. But in my wildest dreams, I never thought we would be here. Almost 20 years later, I really never thought that I would live to see the explosive progress in awareness and compassion. It's really overwhelming, but disruption is like that. It takes its own energy. You can contribute to it, but you can't control it. So,
I love that. You see, lean into the disruption, contribute to it. You can't own it. It's not all on your shoulders, right? There's millions of us now, millions of us, right? And the social justice movements are accelerating.
Yes.
All of them. Veganism is the fastest growing of them.
Yes.
Probably the baby of the pack, but they're all accelerating. And, when we look around the world and we see all of the horror going on, we can come back to, we can find people like Rita. We can go and find somebody who's been active and for a long time and say, how was it when you first started? Right? And have her go, can you see how far we've come? Like, get that perspective again.
The perspective is huge. Even though if you haven't lived through it, you need it. And that's why I said even the history of social movement is really informative. Because it does give you that framework that you're, like, again, what the freedoms that you and I experienced as women didn't happen, overnight. I mean, there's decisions that I made early on in my life, like not to have children, and that was in no way an option even for my mother's generation. So we're standing on the shoulders, and others are going to stand on our shoulders, and we all have to keep that solid foundation for each other, and not the compassion fatigue is real. And especially today, because it is so overwhelming on social media, again, the double-edged sword of awareness. And just being healthy, I think, is huge. Being physically healthy, that gives you resiliency.
Physical health, emotional health, community, perspective. You're hearing all these nuggets of wisdom, right? These are things that we need. And importantly, when you talk about, we're standing on the shoulders of our ancestors, right? That's really important to me. Layla Said, who is a lady who started an experiment on Instagram a while back called Me and White Supremacy. And it took off. She ended up creating a book which will be out, I think, early next year. And it was a challenge to white people to say, how can I be a better ancestor? And to really kind of look at and own how we've benefited from these systems that we've been a part of. You know, even when we're fighting them, right? So even when you look at, like, we might be fighting against sexism, we might be fighting patriarchy, we might be fighting against racism, but, you know, I as a white woman, I have benefited from both the patriarchal and the white supremacist systems, right? And so I have to own that and know it. And that's huge. It is kind of confronting, right?
Yeah, it's a gut punch. It really is.
Like, hey, you know, I have to own the fact that a lot of my world is possible because of animal exploitation. You know, it's like all of these things that are antithetical to who we are now and what we're fighting for, we still benefit from. And so I think understanding that and then stepping into that commitment to be a better ancestor, whether we're going to have children or not, we're still the ancestors for generations to come. We're the ancestors on whose shoulders they will stand. So even if we can't see the finish line right now, we have to keep holding that space for them to stand on. Right.
Yeah. And it's little things and big things. You know, I just remember, like, all the little things that sort of happen, like organic, the availability of organic food. You know, when I first started eating organic food, it was expensive. And it took a little bit more of my paycheck than I would want to. But I knew that it was one of those issues whose time had come. And the people who can push that forward, push it forward, buy it, support family organic farms. You know, eat like products. I remember, this is like the big one for me. I loved Mama Lil's peppers. And I think they're made in Oregon. It's a local. And I remember paying like $14 for a little tiny jar in PCC or Whole Foods, but I loved it so much. And I remember thinking, wow, this is just like, I feel a little guilty about this, but I wanted to support them because they were local and it was such a good product. Now you can buy it in Costco in like a 60-ounce jar, not that big, for like $5 or whatever. Well, somebody had to support that family, you know, early on, and somebody had to support, you know, like in food deserts, bringing in small, you know, grocery stores with fresh food. Like, somebody has to do that. And if you can do that, when you know it's good and you know it's right and it's a multitude of benefit, go there, you know, seek that out in your life. And these are small things that you can empower. And then, you know, there's big things too. There's big organizations that do massive things, you know. So there's just so many ways now.
There really are. And I think, you know, one thing that you're talking about here makes me think about, you know, sometimes people will have this, they'll push back on like, oh, well, you know, like it's elitist to be vegan, or it's elitist, you know, you have the privilege to be able to be a feminist or whatever like that. Yes, we do.
That is absolutely right.
And therefore, it is our job,
even more incumbent upon us,
to use that position, to use that ability, because, you know, here's the thing, right? We live in a capitalist society. Demand drives change, right? And so if we are not investing in, like, so if I'm not investing in, you know, the cool new innovative stuff that's coming out in the vegan food place, for example, I'm not creating enough demand for that market to grow and therefore become accessible to people who may not have the same means or the same you know, budgetary priorities. So and I'm working with an author right now who's writing a book. He's an amazing guy, super great coach, and he's writing a book that talks about some of this. And he's like, man, I was really uncomfortable when I first started writing this book because I'm a white cisgender male, right, in a reasonably, you know, high socioeconomic class. And then he said, the more I sat with that, the more I realized that that's why I have to write this book, because I have to speak to people like me, and I have to help them
open more space
along with, So, you know, first of all, it's a myth, by the way, that veganism is elitist. You can get super ridiculously cheap, good vegan food, like, hey, rice and beans, yay. But for those of us who have the means to invest in new markets, that's what we need to do. We need to use our privilege, our economic privilege, or
access,
our access, or our positional privilege, to get out there and create demand. Create demand, create the markets, right? That opens up possibilities for people who currently don't have access.
Right.
So I think, you know, can you tell I'm a little passionate about this?
Little tiny bit, like, as am I. I mean, if these guys weren't so chilled back here, I might be even a little more animated. But this is the balance we need. Once we start talking about these things, it gets very, very animated, because you know, once you see things clearly, it's really hard not to spread the word.
Yes.
You know, you just want to share it with people. You want them to know how amazing it feels, not to be perfect, but to be aligned with your values. And when you live a life that is aligned with your values, it gives you a kind of a superpower, you know, trippy feeling.
It's a sense of real peace.
A centeredness.
So even though we get angry and we get animated, right, that's fuel.
Correct.
But underlying that anger and that animation is just this real piece of feeling aligned and feeling like I'm being true to who I am. Right?
And especially using your gifts. No pun intended. Using
She's
your
right here.
gifts.
Can you see her? Wait. Ah, there she is. Sweet girl.
And when you can use
She's
your
like,
gift,
nobody uses me. I choose this path.
She does. She is an autonomous being. But when you use your gifts, especially creative people and you know, empaths, you know, like you, Lauren, like your beings that live here with you. Wow, it really is like a natural high when you see somebody bring their talents to bear on a movement and infuse it with, you know, beauty and connection and love. Oh, I mean, I don't want to get like super sentimental, but I'm never I've just never seen the way it's unfolding right now. I've just never seen that before, and I just think it's so amazing. And the people you meet, they'll just blow you away, you know, because they're really selfless, but you know, it is kind of a selfish thing, because we love this planet, we love these animals, and you know, as much time as we have here, we're going to do everything we can, you know, to protect them and make sure that they get, you know, their shot at this life, which can be so joyous if we could just see past our own, you know, short-sightedness.
So I'm curious, one thing that I'm curious about what you have to say about, you know, so we have social movements, right? But within the social movements, we're still fighting, you know, oppressions and microaggressions and not so microaggressions, right? So I'll give you an example, right? In the vegan movement, you know, like sexual harassment and sexism, stuff like that is still a big thing. You know, transphobia, homophobia, like these are showing up in a movement that is ostensibly about loving and respecting all beings, right? And we see this in, you know, in the feminist movement. We see it in all sorts of racial justice movements. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, we are human.
Damn it.
And I think sometimes, to me, it feels like an overcorrection. You know, it feels like, so I just said, you know, people bring their own talents and their own gifts to a movement. Sometimes I feel like people view some of the things that you just identified as kind of a talent. Like, I'm overwrought, I'm over, you know, masculinized, you know, I'll use that, you know, to further, and I just feel like that's, it needs to be corrected, and it is being corrected, I believe. But I think that people misidentify, honestly, sometimes not so honestly. They misidentify what's needed, you know, at the time. And we have a lot of vestige, you know, inequities in our conventional thinking, in our systems, in our political system. We're not representative in the vegan movement and the animal rights movement, I think, because women have been doing most of the heavy lifting for a long time. And I don't see that that's being reflected in, leadership positions. And so, but I think that's changing too. And, there's a sense of entitlement, I think that humans have naturally. And I think that's one of those vestiges that we're going to have to work through and call out when we see it. And find space for people who are engaging in that to change, and when it's not acceptable, ask them to remove themselves. So it's got to be like so any social movement.
Right? We've seen this in some of the bigger organizations where we have seen the removal of senior leaders because of behavior that was inappropriate. So we are starting to see that. I think, for me, a part of it is also just this, like, let's not get so focused on one issue that we forget that it is connected to other issues. I think that's really important. If you are working for social justice, that is going to touch every part of your life. And so you can't just be working for social justice for one species or one type of person or one type of being. It becomes incumbent on us. I'm asking every activist in the world to open your perspective and to realize that you're part of a bigger system here. The other thing for me that comes up with this sort of stuff is moral license, right? Don't get so self-righteous about the fact that you're doing good on one front that you feel that you have that you have permission to be bad on another front, right? So when you experience something like that, if you are being harassed or if you're being oppressed or something like that, speak up. Find somebody safe in the movement that you can speak with. Find an ally. For those of us who are lucky enough not to experience those situations, be an ally.
Yes, absolutely.
Know that we're all connected, and it's really important that we don't just live in this single lens that we have. So and also give people, hold some compassion. Know that we're raised in these deeply embedded systems. I mean, we are like, I sometimes I can't even imagine what it would be like without these systems that we're fighting against, because it's so deeply embedded in us. But I know it's possible. Right. So
and the other thing that I get a little bit of a chuckle out of is some of the minutia that vegans get into, with issues that crop up and products, et cetera, and the fact is that we all feel strongly about things. Obviously we wouldn't be in this movement if we didn't, but the fact that we can have these arguments, we can have these discussions, we can have these conflicts respectfully, obviously, is actually very telling. That we can get down to sometimes the minutia. Maybe somebody might say that's a mischaracterization, minutia, but from where we have come, these are discussions that I am happy to see, because
to have the luxury of being able to debate a technicality, right?
Correct. So that's what I always think of as, wow, just even like 10 years ago, I would have never imagined this is where we would be. So I'm very excited. I'm very hopeful. I'm very optimistic. But in the meantime, we've just got to, keep finding ways, to lift each other up and to improve the movement so everybody feels welcome, because we need people to stop, the cruelty and the exploitation. We can't just work on a 2% of the population model. This has got to go wide. And I believe it will.
Nice. So there you have it, from somebody who's been active in social justice for decades. She's still hopeful. She's still enthusiastic, right? Walk your path, find your tribe, right? Live your truth, take care of yourself, and join us. Activism is not an angry place to be. Activism is actually a very joyful, loving place to be. So Thank you, Rita.
Thank you, Lauren.
I really appreciate it. I kind of ambushed her. She came over for brunch, and I was like, oh, hey, by the way, do you want to do live?
You know, we could talk about this forever, so we might as well do it live.
Might as well do it with all of you. Sweet. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, I love you. All right, everybody.
Bye,
have a good one.
guys.
Bye.